Welcome everyone to this session, which is co-hosted by the NEAR Network and the Humanitarian Policy Group, and is part of the 2021 ALNAP Annual Meeting. My name is Wendy Fenton from the Humanitarian Policy Group, and I'll be moderating this session today. I think, as you all know, this year the ALNAP Meeting is looking at learning emerging from disruption over the last 18 months. This conversation is one of the sessions on the theme of localization, specifically local leadership during disruption. And in the course of our discussion today, we'll be considering the extent to which the grand bargain and COVID-19 have enabled or driven a rise in local leadership and the scope for positive change to be sustained. And during this session, we'll hear from a panel of civil society leaders who will consider what role, if any, the grand bargain has played, or the grand bargain 2.0 could play in advancing localization. And we'll also explore COVID-19 as a disruptor and catalyst for enabling local leadership. And we'll hear examples from the panel's own experience of how civil society organizations are asserting themselves as leaders and drivers of change, not just waiting for change to happen. And finally, we want to reflect on how positive changes made either as a result of incremental change, such as through or accelerated by the grand bargain, or disruption, for example, through COVID-19, can be sustained and multiplied. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel. So first of all, I just want to say that we've got three very distinguished panelists with between them probably about at least 70 years of experience, if not more. I'm not trying to say that they're old, but they're very experienced people. So I'm going to first extend a very warm welcome to Pujioni. And Puji is a senior advisor to the Pujioni Center, an Indonesian local NGO on disaster and humanitarian knowledge management. He's also a founder of SEJAJAR, the CSO NGO network of networks for COVID-19 and the Indonesian Development Humanitarian Alliance. Puji has more than 20 years of experience in disaster risk management and humanitarian emergencies, both in the field and at headquarters with various UN organizations. And recently, Puji has become the NEAR Network Sherpa in the Grand Bargain 2.0. as well as a member of the Grand Bargain Facilitation Group, serving as a voice for humanitarian CSOs and NGOs from the Global South. And I'm also delighted to welcome Sema, Genel, Karaosmanoglu, sorry, Sema. Sema has been working in humanitarian aid and international development for over 24 years in India, Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, and now focuses on work inside Turkey. Sema is the director of Hayata Destek, or Support to Life, a humanitarian aid organization she co-founded in 2005, which is headquartered in Istanbul. And in addition to emergency relief and recovery, Support to Life is involved in protection and resilience work for displaced populations. And finally, we're honored to be joined by Manu Gupta. Manu is supporting the building of resilient communities across Asia Pacific and has been at the forefront of championing and advocating for citizen-led initiatives. He's the co-founder of SEEDS, a not-for-profit organization that enables community resilience through practical solutions in the areas of disaster readiness, response, and rehabilitation. And Manu is a NEAR Leadership Council member and sits on the boards of several other global and regional organizations. And he's been championing localization efforts in Asia for over 2 decades. So let's now kick off by hearing some initial reflections from our panel on local leadership in each of their contexts and what external and internal disruptors have enabled or constrained it. Sema, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you very much, Wendy. So hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Many thanks to ALNAP for hosting us as NEAR and the Humanitarian Policy Group. And many thanks to all of you who are here to listen to our experiences and maybe to share your thoughts on local leadership. Before I start, I would like to say that it's a privilege to have the space where we talk about leadership at the local level, because in my experience, local leadership is really at the crux of what we are trying to achieve around localization. At NEAR, we always say that if we want things to change, we must step up as local leaders. So thanks to ALNAP for acknowledging this and giving us the space to talk about our experiences. Okay, I have only 3 minutes for my opening remarks. So my name is Sema, and I'm the founder and director of an Istanbul-based NGO, Support to Life. Living in a country that hosts the largest number of refugees, my organization and many other Turkey-based NGOs, we have been running large humanitarian operations for 8 to 9 years now. The World Humanitarian Summit, the preparatory events leading up to the summit, and the Grand Bargain, as an outcome of that process, have both been extremely instrumental in shaping our CSO leadership in Turkey. As Turkey-based NGOs, we were active during the consultations where we were engaged in developing strong messages on the need to localize aid. We held a national consultation in Istanbul where we came together as 52 CSO representatives. Many of us attended the World Humanitarian Summit itself. The fact that it was in Istanbul, of course, made this possible. And then the resulting commitments on localization became a reference for us to continue convening around these issues. With concrete targets on localization, the Grand Bargain is still a reference for our advocacy work, where we try to hold signatories to account on their localization commitments and practices in Turkey. Initially, we were only a handful of Turkish NGOs. Over time, we made a call to a greater circle of CSOs, including refugee-led organizations, thus spreading our outreach to a broader base of local leaders. As we became more structured and more systematic in our advocacy work, we formalized our group and now we call ourselves the Localization Advocacy Group. And with help from the NEAR advocacy team, we looked specifically at the localization gaps in Turkey and developed an advocacy strategy specific to localization. Regarding concrete outputs, we have put together a risk matrix and negotiated with international partners on how we should be sharing those risks. Now we have a document of minimum standards for partnership that we want partners to fulfill if they are to collaborate with us as local partners. And collectively, we managed to make progress on creating a reserve fund to cover government liabilities, such as severance obligations, and we have made progress in receiving overheads to cover our indirect costs. And we did this as a collective. And now, for example, we're working on a joint position on data protection and how much of beneficiary data we should be sharing with our partners and in what form. We also have a localization coordinator for our advocacy group, and we're carrying out research on the state of localization in Turkey, one of them with ALNAP, in fact. And as a group, we continue to advocate for a locally led response in Turkey. So just to conclude, I can say that the World Humanitarian Summit process and the Grand Bargain have definitely played a key role in mobilizing local leadership in Turkey.
Thanks very much, Sema. I'm struck by the fact that you have this local advocacy group and that there has been such a focus on that, because I don't know, in several conversations I've had recently with different international actors, there doesn't seem to be much of a focus on that. People tend to think that local organizations aren't really involved in advocacy. So I'm really interested to hear about that, and maybe we can hear more about that later. I want to move now to Puji. Please, Puji, go ahead. Maybe we should move to Manu if Puji is having problems.
So thank you very much, Wendy. It is my honor to be also on this panel with you and all fellow esteemed speakers. So in India, I have had my boots on the ground in now over 35 emergencies in the nearly 3 decades. And in most of these emergencies, we have been receiving grants from international agencies. So just to put things in context, just to put things in context, I was in this whole 3-decade journey, we reached a time when we reached that level of trust to all, with international agencies, which is when they actually started funding almost entirely our whole operations. And of course, we were very grateful to them for helping us assist communities. But perhaps in our naivety, did not realize the implications of that support, especially when we were required to spend the last dollar, and if unspent, return the balance, that we couldn't absolutely deviate an inch on what we had committed on papers. So what if the proposal was written 6 to 8 months ago? And the best part was that the moment the funding period ended, we had to fire all staff, close down offices, sell our vehicles, and even the interest gained on our bank accounts could not be retained. Well, uh, so almost after every emergency, we were back to zero and never kind of built that capacity. And now fast forward to COVID-19, just to bring the whole context to the grand bargain and the topic of today's discussion. We witnessed a complete shift from 100% control earlier to almost none. And the international assistance still came, but with none of those kind of conditions that I spoke about earlier, enabling us to carry out the whole assistance program very differently. And so, coming to the point that you've made, Wendy, and also Sema, this time we could respond much more flexibly as the situation in COVID-19 so demanded. Also even address complex challenges, such as reaching out to people during cyclones and floods at the peak of COVID and the lockdown. Be able to trust and work with local leaders and volunteers. So this was beyond, the usual paid staff that we have on the ground that are deployed for such operations, but actually co-opt many of these informal leaders, citizen volunteers, who had much more proximity to the ground, but were equally capable to perform these operations. Enable hyper-local supply chains, creating livelihood opportunities at a time when many had lost their jobs. Also, even invest in long-term resilience efforts, expanding the scope of assistance to include not just food and healthcare, but also long-term socioeconomic revival of communities. We could factor in this challenge, and that as an organization too, we were affected. Almost my entire senior staff and their families were affected with COVID, including my own aged parents. Travel was very much restricted in the country. And so in many ways, we could invest in digitizing our operations, which we could then enable large-scale cash transfers, for example. Create a pool of volunteer professionals that have remained committed even beyond so-called project life cycles, and they are raring to go for future such emergencies. And we created our own incident command system, which, while getting inspired from, let's say, the international standards and humanitarian principles, also embraces local values, cultures. Even as a nation, I could see that change, moving out with a surge of humanitarian activism, strong network of grassroots organization emerging, countries' businesses bringing in investments in investment, lending their supply chains when all these were very restricted, and most interestingly, an unprecedented kind of cooperation between government and civil society, with these NGO coordination centers set up in every district in the country, every affected district in the country, and then there was regular dialogues, feedbacks, and system corrections that came as a result of these coordination mechanisms. So I think this was a big shift in the humanitarian landscape. Today, incidentally, India has reached 1 billion jabs, which is a big achievement, and has restarted its overseas vaccine friendship program. I think this has all been possible because of this emerging local leadership, Wendy. And I think this is whether you say that this has happened because the grand bargain is finally playing out, or was it due to new laws that restricted foreign funding, or was it purely because of a unique situation we were in during COVID-19 when the whole world was battling with it? I think what is important takeaway for me is that we've really built a strong local institutional capital, and we would like this to stay. And for me, this builds a very, very compelling case where aid could reach the affected communities as directly as it possibly could, and with full agency of those who were affected. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Manu. Some really important points there that we'll explore in the discussion. Puji, I wanted to turn to you now. Are you able to speak?
All right, Wendy, if I just take it on from Manu and Sema then. First, I would like to rejoin them to thank you all for giving us the platform. And I'll just speak as Indonesian Alliance now. Is grand bargain at the center of our life? The answer perhaps is not. There are other things that's going on in our life as well. I could at least say three things. The first one, we believe that in Indonesia, the civil society and humanitarian has reached certain maturity. We have gone through the most devastating natural disasters in the history. We have gone through the massacre of 500,000 people at the end of the communist era. We have gone through the worst fiscal crisis of the world, and now the pandemic. And along that way, we have gone through the experimentation of humanitarian structure. We went through the area coordination, we went through the sectoral coordination, we went through the cluster approach, and now the government cluster approach. So we have gone through. I think we come to the point where the civil society felt that we should consolidate our staff and stand up, be counted. So we are not spring chicken, actually, in Indonesia. We've been battered by a lot of crises in a way. And along the way, we get a bit smarter, maybe. So quoting Colonel Frank Slade in the Son of the Women, who the hell are you talking to? We have been around, you know. I remember that speech. The second thing, Wendy, I'm witnessing this Islamic Renaissance in Indonesia, being the largest Muslim country in the world. The civil society is tired of this stigma of being violent, you know, warmongering and what's not. And I witness bright individuals and organizations who are more aware, more conscientious, more engaging. Organizations like Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, they transform into a giant of humanitarian actions and response in Indonesia. They're operating millions of dollars, right? Now, being one of the most generous giving nation, at least as the Charity Aid Foundation said, we are most giving nation in the world. So the Islamic funding has grown in an enormous size. Yes, there are certain fine tuning need to be done with them. We need to align them with humanitarian principles and good donorship and what's not. But they are forces nonetheless. The Zakat network has more than 150 organizations throughout the country. The Human Initiative has become regional organization, Humanitarian Forum Indonesia and what's not, right? Now the third one, the pandemic. The pandemic really disrupted, and like everyone else, we were caught unprepared for this. More than half of our NGOs, as of February this year, more than half, either facing serious financial crisis or discontinuing their services. Truly existential crisis, because the international actors were retreating from the ground, both physically, program-wise, and money-wise. But the flip side of that pandemic, then the civil society, we get together, we thought we have to step forward. We have to step into the game. We tried to influence the public sphere. That was generally government dominated because it was the early time of pandemic. But we engage with the government, we talk, we work with them, we shout louder, we talk faster. At the end, we renegotiate the power with the government. Now we're trying to even access the government, the public funds for civil society. And we try to form a national full funding, including from the government, for our purposes. Now, funding, how's the grand bargain in relation to this? I'll be very honest with you. The grand bargain was alien. Very, very few of us aware of what grand bargain is. Some of us who do, we thought the grand bargain was actually the dealing and wheeling between the donor countries, the UN and NGOs. It has nothing to do with locals, right? At the beginning. But now as we move along, Pujioni Center, my organization, and Humanitarian Advisory Group, we conducted multi-year research on what kind of humanitarian reforms matter to the national level. And after 3 years, we mapped out the stakeholders, we documented the trajectory of the humanitarian movement in the country, and the stakeholders told us there are 4 things: coordination, capacity. Number 2, we would like to envision a national reference group that is small, multi-sectoral, based on constituent, with consultative in nature. Third, we would like to establish a national pool funding, leveraging local resources, getting some of our colleagues to become intermediary, and also train the NGOs to spend or to administer humanitarian funds more responsibly. So there you go. What's going on in Indonesia, Wendy? Over to you. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Puji. No, really interesting. I mean, I wonder what, I'm interested in the different approaches taken in the different country contexts, because I think you're quite right in saying that the grand bargain initially was very much viewed as a sort of headquarters initiative, a bargain between the big international players within the system. But I think, Sema, you've had, from the very beginning, I think or from early on, you were involved with the localization work stream, weren't you? And I wonder if you could, what your view on it is. Do you agree with Puji and the view from Indonesia, or is there a different situation in Turkey?
Yes, we have been. I have been involved in the localization work stream, Wendy, since the beginning. I mean, I think the whole process leading up to the World Humanitarian Summit was an exciting one for us, because we were so many civil society organizations, NGOs from the global south, and coming together to talk about our challenges as local actors, but also looking at the system in itself, looking at the inefficiencies and the ineffectiveness, and having that opportunity to talk about how things could go differently was a great platform, and we were all very inspired there as to what can actually be done, and just us as a collective, organizations from the global south, we felt that there were some really good issues there that we could push for, and that's how the idea of the NEAR network came about, and we said we have to kind of continue this collective thinking and collective advocacy on how things can be done differently. And with that excitement, and with the World Humanitarian Summit itself, and the grand bargain, and the messages on localization, we felt that at the global level we had to continue pushing for things. But in the last few years, what we've realized is we do a lot of talking at the global level. But to move things forward, we need to look back at the country level. We need to look at our practices and how we can actually do things differently on the ground. And this is, for us, has been a realization where, spending time on these platforms, it's time and energy, and we don't have plenty of that, unfortunately. So we thought maybe a better use of our time and our energy would be actually to focus on the country level. So in the last few years, we've really looked at what localization means for us in our context, because we also talk about localization, but it's so broad and it means something different for every organization. So we thought, let's look at what it means for us specifically and what we want to see differently done at the country level. So, the work stream has been interesting and it's given us maybe the broader perspective. But then if we really want to push things forward and put policy into practice, we really have to focus on the country level. And as local leaders, until and unless we mobilize what's already there and we discuss how we want to move things forward and what we want to see done differently, then it's things are not going to change. So I do, I resonate a lot with what Puji has said around in Turkey. Similarly, we do have quite a mature civil society, I would say. And we are now in a position where we are looking more internally and looking at how we can perhaps initiate that change from that level rather than from the global level.
Thanks, Sema.
Wendy, if I may.
Yeah, do go ahead, Puji.
Could I just? This is the difference. In Indonesia, we heard grand bargain on second hand. We heard it from our INGO colleagues or something on whispering or some of their practices. And suddenly, the Central Sulawesi earthquake was a defining moment. When the government closed the door for international community, suddenly we, the locals, have to step into the roles that were told to us before. Now we have to do it ourselves. So you look at localization from a different current altogether. We were forced by circumstances. We have to get ourselves under the pressure cooker, if you like, to quickly become rice. And to arise into this occasion. And from there, we realized how complex humanitarian reform was. Hundreds of priorities, 12 work streams, and it's my head spins. So there we decided, I think we need to focus on certain things that really matters, because each INGO responsible for certain streams, each UN responsible, and so many streams. And at the funnel down to us, at the local players. We need to decide what matters to us, and that's what we do. And it turned out differently, perhaps, but at least it's where it's become unique now.
And have you found that both the international community and government is supportive of you, civil society actors, NGOs taking that leadership role in this way?
Well, this is the interesting thing. I think the INGO were taken, I think, some of them at least by surprise of how we tackle this thing. I mean, in the Central Sulawesi, we documented localization. We interview everybody else. And then we come with a little documentation of how localization is seen from the local perspective. The government, on the other hand, have no idea what it is at the beginning. But now they know, and this is the position. Grand bargain is not a UN process. So the government is not necessarily signing up to this, but they agree on the idea of strengthening local, actors and all. All of this are acceptable, but the word grand bargain, for example, would not be anything that very easily be, taken on board. That's our reality.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I think that's the case in many situations. But Manu, let me move to you. What's the situation in India?
Well, I think it's very similar to what Sema and Puji have just described. There is, we've been pushing back the whole, the domination of the international system in the country for very long. I think the COVID provided us with that opportunity that strong, locally led action can actually work. And what was really remarkable this time, Wendy, was that we could see the government in a very tacit way supporting that cause. These NGO coordination centers, which were set up in each of these districts across the country, and we have 728 districts, is not a new idea. It was formed after the Indian Ocean tsunami that hit India in 2004, and many similar experiences. But because of the presence of the international organizations, sometimes. So I think because of the presence of international organizations in these very local coordination centers, made governments and local governments particularly uncomfortable, because there were obviously local dynamics at play and local politics and, all other issues coming in. But this time it came almost spontaneously. And I thought that, it was in some way because the international presence was minimal, that the governments kind of warmed up to local organizations and local alliances and found themselves more comfortable working with them. So I think this is thanks to COVID, and as I said earlier, I hope it stays back. I mean, just responding to a question from Annalise here about, do you think it will remain as such? I feel personally that the system will try to go back to the equilibrium, which is what it was pre-COVID. But unless we build on some of the strengths that have come out of this 18 months of disruption, I'm afraid we will not be able to make a lasting change.
But Wendy, I have a question for Manu.
Go ahead.
Manu,
Yes.
when we did survey in Indonesia of INGOs, the way they interpret localization was rather interesting. This is in the lead up to the regional conference on localization of IFRC led. They said localization means we have employed local people. That's localization, right? We have established office. That's localization. And so we have turned our personality into national or even local NGO names, or the logo is the same. That seems to be localization. Is that the same thing happening in your country?
Very much, Puji. And one thing that has been noticed globally is that many of these international organizations, like you said, call themselves becoming local, or their interpretation of localization is to open a national office with national staff, is happening particularly in countries which are high on the rank of giving, like Indonesia, you said about the CAF report, and India too. And so that's interesting. I mean, I find that it's these wealthy countries where these international organizations would like to open their national offices. So is the agenda really about localization? I doubt.
Now, what we feel, at least in Indonesia, by becoming national, right? But they have behind the whole system of the international, engine. Then it's almost unequal playing field, if you like. They have huge PR capacity, they have a fundraising capability, and all the methodologies. We are struggling. So I think our market, if that's the right way of saying it, Wendy, become very crowded now, and we need to assess where we're standing with this type of localization. I feel
Yes,
that localization
in fact, it has.
Yeah, go ahead, Manu.
No, you're absolutely right. It has become very, very competitive, raising funds locally because of these international brands coming in and crowding out our space here nationally. So it is actually running counter to the whole idea of localization in some way within countries.
I think this speaks too to a question I see in the Q&A from Bonaventure. He said, thanks, Sema, for sharing this great work of your localization advocacy group. Would you be willing to develop more on the way the work of the group, example, the minimum standard for partnership, is being considered and applied by your international partners? Sema, have you got anything to say on that? And I should also, sorry, before you start, I just want to say that we're going to launch another 3 poll questions. So keep an eye out for those and please do respond. Sema, go ahead.
Thanks, Wendy. I don't see the chat, and I wasn't able to see the poll either. But from what you've just said, Wendy, I suppose Bonaventure is asking whether we would be willing to kind of expand this minimum standards of partnership to meaning beyond Turkey, or just to understand the question correctly.
Bonaventure, could you unmute yourself if you're happy to do that, just to explain further?
Yes, thank you, Wendy. I'm online. I hope you can hear me. My question was about how this tool that we are proposing, for example, the one that you mentioned, the partnership one, how these tools are being received, considered, applied, integrated in the international partners system. So because you have done this great work of putting together what you will want to see in the partnership, is that being considered? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question, Bonaventure. Yes, it's actually been quite a success, I must say, because oftentimes when we do want a change in the way things are done, and we make proposals as to how that can be done, oftentimes we're confronted with the remark that these are donor rules and regulations and we can't change them. But when we do go into the details, because in fact donor rules and regulations are quite broad. They're more at the level of principles rather than the nitty-gritty of how we do things on a daily basis. So ensuring that we do stay within the principle of how things should be done, looking at ground realities and looking at our liabilities and the risks that we are taking, we have always managed to find ways of doing things differently. So we've managed to change practice in a way that it doesn't contradict donor rules and regulations, but it also gives us the space to help us manage those risks. Similarly, with covering our indirect costs rather than just focusing on the full funding being transferred to direct project activities, we've had quite a bit of success there, because we said the bigger operations we run and the better quality work, because donors are interested in quality work, and quality costs money. So we're going to have we're going to need those budget lines where we can actually we can invest in building up those systems and sustaining those systems. So we've actually going into this type of a dialogue, talking about what the risks are from our side, and looking at how we can find a middle way, another way of doing things. We've actually had quite a bit of success, and I think what was important, Bonaventure, is the fact that we didn't do this alone, as Support to Life doing this, or bilaterally, but we actually got together as a collective and said, look, we're only a handful of partners here, and collectively we would like things to be done differently. And we've actually had positive responses. So that kind of dialogue because they do acknowledge that there is this transfer of risk, and they are interested in looking at how we can better manage or share that risk. So we've actually had quite positive results on that.
I wonder too, Sema, I think all three of you actually mentioned either pooled funding or initiatives that you've undertaken through coalitions or platforms on raising funding independently or raising funding internally within your country contexts. Do you see that as the way of the future, or could you talk a little bit about some of those examples? Happy for whoever wants to go first to go first.
Well, Wendy, in the case of Indonesia, we've gone through a variety of episodes of this funding drama. Having some of our NGOs become so large, and they copy the behavior of their international colleagues, and they become viable to administer this funding. We have gone through also an episode of colleagues becoming consortium, also learning from NGOs, and build a consortium and being able to absorb the fund, administer it, do the joint assessment, joint analysis, and what's not. And the later, what we're going through now is that, as I said earlier, the Islamic financing, we tap into these local resources. We try to build ourselves, rules and code of conduct and what's not. It's still a long way to go, but I think that's the future. We see that as long as the funds is being administered by someone else and not the locally led, we will always and continue to be victim of, well, not victim of, we still be on the not knowing what's going on. You know what I mean? I think that to me, this is the financial sovereignty, if you like, of humanitarian affairs in the country, that we must have the space to take the role in the decision making and Not that we're compromising accountability, we're fully cognizant that donors are accountable to their taxpayers. We're aware of that. We know that the requirement is high, but not that high that we cannot breathe. So we need to find a middle ground, and waiting for that, Wendy, I don't know when it's going to happen. So we have to take charge of our own situation and see how it will go.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah. Manu, what about you?
Well, the way I look at the humanitarian landscape in my country, as I said earlier, there is a sudden mushrooming of many organizations who are calling themselves humanitarian organizations, and I think the whole meaning and context of humanitarianism is being interpreted very, very differently depending on what is your affiliation. And so I think there is a problem there. We are still at that beginning of that learning curve, so to say, to be able to come to consensus. And I think in that sense, pooled funding is a little far off concept for us at this stage of the whole change that is happening, the whole disruption that is happening. What we are also seeing is that it's not that the amount of funding has definitely increased. The giving ability of the India's middle class has increased. The private sector is now mandated to give 2% of its book profits for corporate social responsibility. And humanitarian relief is identified as one of the 7 areas that they can give money for. So in that sense, the amount of money available for humanitarian activities has definitely increased. But so has the number of organizations. So it gets distributed over a large ecosystem. So our efforts of creating pooled funds for the organizations who have been in the scene for a fairly longer time has not been very, very successful so far. But having said that, we are trying to create some sense of what we're calling a community resilience fund, which is not a fund that sits and gets administered by organizations, but by people and community-based organizations. And that is where we are having some initial success.
Yeah, that's interesting, Manu. I think too, I mean, there's some other initiatives like that going on as well, I believe. I think in the Philippines, I don't know if we have anybody online who is from the Philippines or working there, who could talk to some of the civil society pooled funds that have been established there. But I wonder how much, in your experience or your view, how much cross-country exchange and learning is there? I mean, I know we're a global society now, but everybody's busy, everybody's focused on their context, but their own context primarily. But how much cross-learning is going on in your view?
Wendy, if I may, but before I respond to that, let me chip into what Manu was saying. I think I've seen different things in Indonesia. We're talking about where the money come from, but I'm also concerned where the money is going to be allocated to whom, right? Now, initially, I thought that a lot of this humanitarian funding were channeled to humanitarian organizations. Now, the reality in Indonesia at the local level, virtually none of the organizations call themselves humanitarian. There's a women association, religious circles, development movement, literacy, whatever. Okay, and these are the environmental movement. These are the people who respond to humanitarian crisis. Now, when the humanitarian funding is earmarked to humanitarian organizations at local level, none of them are qualified. So I think this is where the pooled funding or certain mechanisms where nationally we recognize our colleagues, although their names are journalist association, for example, but they have certain arms that do humanitarian response. Not in the whole sum, but some of them, maybe they're qualified to operate some of these funds, for example. Again, I agree with Manu, conversation is still very long, including how to define who are eligible to administer these funds. Because at the local level, as I said, very rare. I've seen many vegetarian, but not many humanitarian, you know. But joke aside though, in the near network, we had that conversation. We brought colleagues from Kenya, from Philippines, from Bangladesh and others to talk about what the state of the conversation on pooled funding. And we're excited now it's getting to this creative financing and all that. I think the conversation is getting around now.
Yeah, no, because through the NEAR network, there are some pilots underway, aren't there, on locally administered pooled funds. So it'll be interesting to see how those pan out. Sema, I know that the platform that you've been involved in forming has raised quite a lot of funding in Turkey, independently of international funding. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Wendy, and that for us was a realization that there's actually so much potential in country, you know, that we haven't tapped into. But it was kind of a bit of a surprise because, you know, as you just mentioned, NEAR has been working on alternative financing mechanisms, looking at pooled funds that are not, you know, not OCHA funded pools, but others that are locally driven and locally led. So we were familiar with, you know, with those experiences, but for us in Turkey, we you know, hadn't realized that there was, you know, that potential in country until the Izmir earthquake last year. It was yes, exactly last year, this month in October, where we were already struggling with COVID, and then on top of that, you know, there was this earthquake, and there was so many people that wanted to you know, provide support, that wanted to help out, and we actually realized that we are able to mobilize quite a bit of not just funding, so in kind and cash assistance, but also a lot of volunteers. And we came to realize that this is actually, you know, something that we were able to overcome on our own with internal resources. We managed to raise 9 million Turkish lira, which is almost $1 million currently. So that was quite a pleasant surprise for us. But just going back to what Puji said, I mean, we are only a small number of organizations that really have the mandate of working with disaster affected populations. But other than that, the broader civil society in Turkey works on a variety of other issues, and they don't call themselves humanitarian. So, I mean, we have a coordination, a body for humanitarian work, but there's a whole nother coordination body for civil society in general. We actually have what we call a civil society disaster platform, and they have no connection to the humanitarian system. So they're basically looking at more community-based, smaller scale work. But like I said, last year, we realized we could actually, you know, do much more than what we were doing now. So I think it's really important for the humanitarian system to look at what's already there, the broader civil society, not just focus on, you know, I mean, humanitarian aid has its own jargon and its own ways of doing things and its own boxes, but I think we really need to tap into what's already there, because once we do that, then it's also making better use of the humanitarian funding that goes in country, because it's multiplied by what's already there, by what's existing there. So I think we need to think more about how we you know, merge the two, because it has been a completely separate, at least in country, that's our experience. You know, the work that broader civil society does is like a whole other system, and the humanitarian system has, you know, it works in a completely different way, and they don't necessarily speak to each other. So I think that's an important one.
Yes, agreed. Puji, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I just want to take the conversation further in a rather humorous way, in a way. In a country that is frequented by disasters like Indonesia, And there are thousands and thousands of NGOs, right? And they are not humanitarian, and as I said earlier, but they have to raise to the occasion when they're required. So in the alliance, we're thinking, agree with Sema, we need to have more conversation with colleagues from the development sector. They're much richer than we are, but we should not hold accountability loose from the humanitarian colleague, by the way, right? We should keep breathing under their neck. But that's being said though, Wendy, in Indonesia, we thought we need to teach every NGOs about humanitarian response, even if it's only the very basic, right? The lingo, some terminology, some concept, just very basic. We even planning to call this kind of competence as life skills. You know, like a CPR. Everybody must know. I know how to do CPR. I know how to do Heimlich maneuver, but I hope I never use it, right? So we thought in a country like Indonesia, we want to have every NGO to at least be aware of that, so that when things hits the fan, they could do it and they could relate with their external colleagues in a more meaningful way. So that's just, you know, broadening the conversation. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. And Manu, I think that is an approach that that you take, don't you, in the work that you're doing through SEEDS and other. Go ahead.
Yeah, very much. And, you know, and to your question on cross-learning and just taking it further from where Puji left, he's right that, you know, with these emergence of many other organizations who were already there doing some work, but have risen to the occasion, so to say, to respond to a challenge such as COVID, which, you know, kind of engulfed us all. You know, also takes us to this point of how do we sustain this learning? How do we bring in the concepts of humanitarian principles and standards into the system? And that, I think, requires some systemic changes, some kind of structural changes that unfortunately are not happening the way one would have liked at this point of time. Of course, an important role will have to be played by the government in such a kind of scenarios, by some of the academia and the likes of ALNAP. If we could open an India chapter for ALNAP to do some of those convenings. But until that happens, I think this would be a process of very much a self-learning from experience, where, you know, these trials happen on media and questions being asked whether, you know, did you ensure protection issues in carrying out humanitarian assistance, and, you know, the social media trials, so to say, that happen, that are really setting some kind of a you know, very loose set of standards or principles, which unfortunately are the way things are getting guided by the day. So I think there is a very urgent need right now to get on a very steep learning curve, and we need institutional support to be able to do that at scale, with so many organizations really coming. And I think COVID is not the end. You know, with the climate crisis now knocking at our doors, you know, increasing number of disasters happening in South Asia, I think this it cannot be just those few humanitarian organizations trying to enlarge and scale out their work. It has to be many more players, and therefore the need for cross-learning is very high at this point of time.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So it sounds as if you feel that there, I mean, moving back to the grand bargain, that there may be some scope, or that there, I'm just, whether you think that there is anything within the grand bargain 2.0. It has these two enabling priorities around quality funding and localization, but of course other work has been done before. Whether you think that this is any of these mechanisms, or this mechanism can help in terms of using what is useful from the international system and applying it to what you're doing locally.
See, I feel, Wendy, that the Grand Bargain, the 1.0 was really a good aspiration, and it brought together the community to express their aspiration, their intention to move forward. But it was also a missed opportunity in some way in actually looking at the details, and the devil is always in the details. When you go national, when you go local, how do you interpret some of those intentions? And that's where I think it did not make progress that was good enough. So learning from that, I think this 2.0 is one such opportunity where actually I would like to see, and that would be real success, where these conversations happen nationally, whether we do it through the caucuses, that the mode is there, but more informal discussions about how do you make these intentions translate locally. And each country could have its own interpretation depending on the context, depending on the challenge they are facing, and the civil society structure. uh, there are now national laws in place in many countries that prohibit or restrict foreign funding. So taking all of those into context, we need to carry out these in-country consultations. And I would certainly think Puji is nodding his head, so I'm sure he would think the same for Indonesia as well as in Turkey.
Now, I would rejoin Manu on that. I think one thing that was very exciting about Grand Bargain 2.0 from local perspective is the more explicit space being made to have conversation at the national level, right? And that's what's happening in Indonesia now. We talk about our own related concern, the most intimate problem that we're confronted with, and that's how it matters. And we see the Grand Bargain as a pipeline to raise the issue when we cannot address it locally. So in a way, it's almost like a declaration of independence, like nationally, but having this pipeline available for us to channel it. I think it's very different from 1.0, in which it was perspective that is happening globally and trickle down. I think it's more, at least the way I want to see it, it should be a locally led reform, right? With a local flavor. And it's only becoming international when and if necessary, not the other way around. Right? Yeah. So that's the way I see it.
And being on the facilitation group, of course, gives you and those you're acting as a voice for more opportunities to shape the direction of that in the future.
I would say, yeah. I mean, this is the first time that we have the Global South sitting at the facilitation group. I'm entering with a lot of trepidation and anxiety, but let's see what's happened. We have to make it work. Otherwise it will not work in future, inshallah.
And Sema, given your involvement, close involvement with the localization work stream, what do you think about the Grand Bargain 2.0 and the opportunities that it presents? Are you optimistic about that?
I mean, I'm happy about the fact that we will be working on this issue for another 2 years at least, on top of the 5 years that we have been pondering about localization. But of course, we're looking at structural change, and this is not going to happen overnight. So I think it's important that we do continue that discussion. Even though I feel that, to put it into practice, we need to start working more at the country level, but this discussion needs to continue at the global level, I feel. And one new feature in the Grand Bargain 2.0 is this national reference groups that have been proposed. And I think that's a great opportunity for us as local organizations to come together with the different stakeholders, the humanitarian stakeholders, and look at the country level and how we can move things forward. Although the proposal in the proposal itself, it's foreseen that the humanitarian country teams would be pulling together these national reference groups, but I feel that's definitely not the way we should be doing it. We do have, the local leadership there, and we've already made some progress. We're moving forward. So I think this would actually help us upgrade and bring it to a level where we're not just talking to ourselves, but we're looking at and listening to others that are there, functioning within the system, and jointly looking at how we can make those changes. I mean, we've been talking about learning. I think that's a really, really important one. I mean, when I look at my organization, we've been doing, running huge programs for a decade now, and there is so much material there. There's so much know-how there that we've gathered. We've contextualized it. We've written up things from scratch. We've learned. There are very local ways of doing things. And it's a shame to once the crisis is over and funds run out, then everything is gone. And we're looking at in Turkey specifically, how can we're only the larger national organizations that are a part of the humanitarian system, but we feel we need to engage others, because there's so much great work being done outside of my organization and a few others. And we have actually started playing this intermediary role where we work within a mentorship program, where we work with some smaller NGOs, with refugee-led organizations, really transfer some of that know-how of how of what we have been doing, and to look at how we can increase the impact of the work that we do. So it's really interesting to look at how we can learn new learning platforms. We have one as the Near Network. We're working on a South to South platform, looking more at cross-learning as well, looking at other countries, maybe other contexts or regions. But I think this is very valuable, and I think this is probably replacing the capacity building that we have been talking about for so long.
Yes.
But it's more about learning from each other at every level, at the country level, but also beyond borders. Looking at how we can learn from each other. And I think the more we do listen to each other, the more interesting ideas we have about how things can be done differently.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I would think that in terms of, for all of you, I mean, you've all done so much in terms of with your leadership roles that you've assumed and that you've taken forward, that I'm sure that mentoring support in that way would be a very important factor, going ahead and taking the initiative rather than waiting for something to happen, as I think you've all said. I wanted to go back to the polls, but I think they've disappeared now. At least I can't find them. And I know some of you may have been trying to put comments in the chat and had trouble with that. So do put your questions or comments in the Q&A if you can't, for whatever reason, put them in the chat. I mean, I think one of the polls, if I remember, because I looked at it quickly and then here, they've come back now. Yes, they've come back now. So we have do you think COVID-19 has been an accelerator for local action? And so we had 85% of people said yes, and 15% said no. And I think from our discussions just now, it's pretty clear that it did act as a real disruptor in many contexts, and an accelerator for local action. But the question is whether those gains can be sustained, I guess. And then it says, do you think the ground bargain has catalyzed positive change at country level? So we have 56% of people saying no, and 44% of people saying yes. And I'd be really interested to hear from other people who are other participants on the session in the Q&A, if you can't access the chat, about your own experience. If you said no, why do you think that's the case? And then finally, if there were mechanisms for you to engage in the ground bargain where you are, would you? And 92% of people said yes, which I think is really significant. So I think people are, and from what you're saying, Sema and Manu and also Puji, that there are it looks as if there are opportunities to, well, Manu, actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth because I think Puji and Sema said this, but that it is possible that these mechanisms may be useful under the Grand Bargain 2.0 anyway, in terms of moving things forward. What about in India? I mean, the Grand Bargain doesn't seem to feature as large there, would you say, Manu?
Yeah, at this point of time, Grand Bargain under that umbrella is not a big thing for all of us, because in any case, a lot of this funding is moving from within the country. But having said that, some of these needs and demands that are coming out are very much aligned to what Grand Bargain seeks to achieve, because even within the country, and it's a large country, there is a national and a subnational move, and so many of these principles of Grand Bargain are applicable. I would certainly like to have more of these discussions of under the Grand Bargain 2.0 within this country, not just to inform how we need to organize ourselves within the country, but also how some of the good practices from the country can become reference points for others to follow. So in that sense, it is very relevant, but at this point of time, the awareness on Grand Bargain is very, very limited.
Mm. Do you think if there was more awareness, I mean, I don't know whether if there was more awareness that there would be more of an interest, or do you think even so people wouldn't see it as relevant?
No, I think considering the size of funding currently, and also looking at just the frequency of emergencies, the scale of such emergencies, I do feel that this is something very relevant for the context. But how it takes shape and what form it takes is something uh, really open for interpretation in our context. But I certainly do feel that we need to bring this this discussion, this convening within the country.
Thanks, Manu. I see I've missed a question from Alice that was in the Q&A, and this is directed at Puji. Puji, Alice is asking, Alice Obrecht from ALNAP asking, do you see the response to the 2003-4 tsunami as being a big turning point for Indonesian civil society on humanitarian issues? What have been the driving influences for the increased activity and leadership of local actors?
Well, in the 3-year research that we conducted with Humanitarian Advisory Group, we did a review, of what has happened with humanitarian landscape in Indonesia and the role of civil society following the tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami. I think to a certain degree, that terrible occurrence brought into our consciousness that there is no single entity who can deal with cataclysmic disasters. No government, not international, no anyone. So that's being said. Secondly, from there was a movement among the civil society, myself being one, and we even pushed the disaster management law legislation in Indonesia from civil society side. We progressively and aggressively pursued until it became legislation that shaped the disaster management today, that set aside a space for civil society to play. But also there's terrible learning coming out from it. How disorganized it was. How it became a secondary tsunami to the original tsunami, if that language is correct, right? The misery that was created because the international players, they left with half-constructed houses, broken vehicles, and worse than that, whatever they introduced to the locals as their practice in the course of burning money, we, the locals, we cannot follow it through. We cannot pay people to go to meeting, for example. We cannot provide extra meals for children every morning. So we have to clean up the process. And along the way, we learn one thing or two. And from there, the Indonesian Society for Disaster Management, Humanitarian Forum, and things are coming out. So yes, we learn along the way, bitterly nonetheless, but we learn.
Thanks, Puji. I've got, let's see, I've got another, well actually we've just, we're running up to our last sort of 10, 15 minutes now. And we had a final poll, which was basically based on this session. Are you more or less optimistic about the grand bargain being an enabler of change at a local level? So of the people who responded, 46% appeared to be more optimistic. 38% are, moving down to 53%, or up to 53% seem to be more optimistic. 33% unchanged, and 13% less optimistic. So that's interesting to me. It's still changing. People are still responding. So maybe we'll come back to that in a minute. But I think because we're going to end with some reflections on that. So it'd be good if as many people as possible could respond to that one, because I'm interested to know. But we've got, I think, getting back to the theme of this conversation around disruption. And Lisa Wolf has said, if we look at the stories of disruptions, revolution, evolution, status quo, what do the panelists think will be needed for the revolution to happen regarding local leadership and locally led humanitarian action, which is maybe the most important thing for you, she says. And does anybody want to tackle that one? Just jump in.
I think, Wendy, let me just jump in here on, I think one criticism that we have faced all along is that where is the evidence? What is the real proof that localization works? It makes things more efficient. It sounds very, very fluffy at this point of time. And I think the biggest challenge for us is to be able to produce that evidence, to be able to document such practices. I think we all know subconsciously that it works, but we don't have the hard evidence to be able to say that in a very, very compelling way. And I think that's one area that I do feel we need to work. The other is to, create a bottom-up a movement around this. It is not about just a negotiation. It is about a movement of people sharing those values, who come together and who push for this change. And how we create those kind of platforms, how do we open up such opportunities for those voices to be heard, is where I think this revolution will get the sparks that it needs to get to accelerate. That's my opinion.
Right, and my addition to that, I think, at least as far as localization is concerned, this will actually, maybe it will make a dent in the future, at least in the grand bargain, if we reframe localization. I think localization, the way I look at it, is really reflecting the top-down motion. I would probably more inclined to say locally led reform, and let's give the locals at the center, at the front, at the back of this thing. It will also require more receptive and supportive attitude among the key stakeholders. As Manu said, to acknowledge local leaders, give them the right place, get them to the appropriate support, so that they could actually act as leaders in this movement. And finally, also the willingness, if you like, and the readiness of the major stakeholders to adapt to this change, right? If this is not happening, then the reform will most likely be retracted back to 2016. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Puji. Sema.
Maybe just to add to that briefly, I mean, just looking at the World Humanitarian Summit process, it was very participatory. We were there as local actors, engaged, sharing our point of view. People from affected communities were present. Social media was well used. So I think it's also important to open up those spaces. We talked about learning from each other. And I think it's really valuable that wherever we can to open up those spaces where we learn from each other and discuss how we move things forward. And as we practice that, I think that's probably the mature ground on which then we can realize that change.
Thanks very much, Sema. I think we're just about to run out of time. We've got a few more minutes, but I just wondered if I'm looking to see if we have any other questions or interventions from our participants. We've had a bit of a problem with
there's a question from Ring.
Yes, thank you. I just saw that. Let me read that out. So Ring says there are criticisms that the representation of local leadership in the humanitarian country team is more nominal and has no heavy weight in terms of influence on decision-making and power dynamics. And Ring, I'm not sure, but I think you're asking whether people agree with that or what their view is on that, but feel free to unmute yourself if you want to explain further. Otherwise, I'll just hand over. Oh, go ahead, Ring.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Actually, this one is a comment that I've dropped there. Here in South Sudan, we have a lot of criticism. The way, the humanitarian response, is being managed here. And many national NGOs, actually, they even also say that if possible, they can boycott the funding because of the kind of restrictions, Yes, I know, there are some weaknesses, but also there's also flexibility needed, actually. Yes, we have national NGOs who have capacity. We have those who don't have capacity. We have the medium one. So there's need, for, and even also, some are saying that humanitarian response in South Sudan is not for localization. It's taxpayers' money that is being brought from the West. And we have to deal with it according to what we want. So I'm not in the HCT team, but these are the conversations and, criticisms that we hear. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that Ring. I don't know if any of you would like to comment.
I would probably say something about HCT, but in relation to the grand bargain as well. In my career, I have seen HCT that operates in the height of emergencies, in a failed state, and in a stable countries. I think in a failed state situation, the humanitarian country team indeed become very, very important, right? Because the state is failing, you know what I mean? And humanitarian have to step in a big way. But in a stable country like Indonesia, like Philippines, where crises happen in part of the country, not the whole country. So the government is operating normally with strength, like India, for example. The government have finance in almost everything, and the international community are helping in a small way. So the posture of humanitarian country team seems to be different from one context to the other. That's being said, it has ramification on the strength of the local presence in that team. Humanitarian country team by nature probably is representing the so-called cluster or sector or speaking for the headquarters on technical matters. While the local representation are sitting there because they're simply because they are locals. They don't bring in money. They don't bring in portfolio. So I'm not surprised that that brings it that the presence probably is just pro forma presence. This is not bad, but it can be optimized along the way. And it could be reformed as well. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, Puji. I see that we're just about out of time. But I do want to I think Gilbert's question is one that we can end on, actually. And I'd like to give you each 1 minute just to respond to that, if you don't mind. So Gilbert Basimwa has said, good if you could think about what didn't really work since the summit. Could you talk about what hasn't worked so far? Why should we be optimistic? Well, at the same time, the system hasn't changed. The system is rigid and very hierarchical. So if you have any final comments on that, that would be helpful. And then I'll just take 1 minute to wrap up. Sema?
Yeah, sure, I can go, Wendy, thanks. Actually, not much has changed. Absolutely, I do agree with that. But I'm also very happy about the fact that, we're in the 6th year and we're talking about localization, and everyone in the humanitarian sector is talking about localization. And I think it's really, really healthy that we have that conversation. We keep it going, even though it's going to be, it's not an easy task, to make those changes around, moving towards a more locally led a humanitarian system. But I'm optimistic about the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that there's the grand bargain, we have concrete targets, and we can actually, hold stakeholders to account on what they've signed under. And I think these are all very, very positive things for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Sema.
From my
Manu,
side, I think myself, I was very happy to hear what Sema was saying, that civil society, Global South were participating in a big way in the 2016. This probably is one thing that didn't work, because there was discontinuation. There was a disconnect from that process in Istanbul and back home, so that we are not aware of what's going on. We don't know what's being discussed at large, right? So that part needs to be fixed. I think we need to have a platform in the Global South. We need to have more conversation among ourselves in the Global South, and we need to have not unified, but at least a resonating voice among ourselves. Only then I think we can make a difference. Over to you.
Manu, any last thoughts on that?
It's very similar to Puji and what Sema said. I think, as I described in my opening remarks, we didn't have a name to, this phenomena of North versus South, and localization helped us articulate what we really needed. And I think thanks to that grand bargain, it became a conversation that we started having with international actors, with fellow actors in the humanitarian space. And in that sense, I do see there is progress, but we need to really understand that at the end of the day, humanitarian aid is very deeply entrenched in the whole political agendas that are there across the world, and that is not going to change so easily. So if we really want to bring in that systemic change, I think we'll have to give it a little more time. And so in that sense, I would choose to remain optimistic and hope that we are able to bring change sooner than one would actually think systemic change would require. Wendy.
Thanks very much, Manu. You'll be happy to know that 54% of our participants now feel more optimistic after the session. But I think that in conclusion, it's clear that the grand bargain is not the driver of this change, and it certainly hasn't been transformative. But it has allowed, from our discussion today, it seems that it has allowed discussions to take place. It has helped to push localization to the fore. As Sema said, everyone is talking about it. Local leaders are moving forward, sometimes with the support of initiatives like the Grand Bargain, but more often on their own. And things like COVID, disruptors like COVID, like the Sulawesi earthquakes and tsunami, and the Indonesian tsunami, and other events like that have also served to accelerate action on localization and local leadership. Given that we're out of time now, I want to just say that a huge thank you to all of our excellent panelists. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and we've really benefited from hearing your reflections and engaging with those. And thanks to all of the participants today for joining us. So thanks again, and long may this discussion continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.